Do you remember those heady days of lockdown? Oh, they were a joy, weren't they? I think it was about 3 years ago. It's very easy to forget, isn't it? Those wonderful days in which we were trapped inside, unable to get out of our houses. We could look through the window and nothing was going on in the street, was it? Can you remember you could actually hear bird song back in those days? Open the window to that lovely fresh air as you were boiling inside in March in 2020 on that very hot spring days. That 3 weeks to flatten the curb. That it's all right. That dishevelled bloke. Do you remember that dishevelled bloke? He was Prime Minister, straight from Have I Got News to You to the Prime Ministership of the country, standing there behind his lectern, looking ever so worried and concerned and saying, I'm ever so sorry, we're all going to have to lock down, which was a bit strange. Can you remember there was that other bloke? What was his name? Very reptilian looking bloke. Chris Whitty. He was the one who stood there. And I remember he came out and he said, actually, there's nothing to worry about. This virus that's coming over from China, nothing to worry about. If you're in the over 80 bracket, you might be a bit concerned, or if you've got some core morbidities. And then it was as if he pushed off the stage, hold on a second, mate, given a new script, and actually came back the next day saying it was the Black Plague. We were all going to die in a horrible, agonising death, and we all had to stay inside. And that Boris bloke, he would sort of doing the same, the dishevelled looking Prime Minister I mentioned just a few moments ago. Oh, those heady days of staying indoors, of lockdown. And when at first they said, no, it's not a lockdown, is it? It's just a precaution. But we knew what it was, staying in there, unable to go out. We were given an hour, do you remember? An hour of exercise. You could go for a cycle ride, as long as you weren't spreading the virus, of course. And, of course, you could go for a walk. You weren't allowed down the gym. You couldn't do that sort of exercises if anybody was around with you. No. That was, you had to do it completely on your own. And that was, make sure you wear your mask outside with the vitamin D where there's nobody about. I remember going for a walk in the countryside up on the downs, and somebody came the other way and I saw him, and in order to protect himself, very wise, he reversed into a hawthorn bush until it completely enveloped him. Oh, good morning. Good morning, he said, with his mask firmly fitted on his face. But most of the time, the 23 hours of a day, we were all stuck inside, the children running around, screaming, getting ever so het up, getting worried, trying to get them to sit down and go on the Zoom so they could talk to their teachers. Do you remember all of that? Trying to get them to learn something, because the kids weren't allowed at school, unless they were a key worker, of course. Then somehow the virus wasn't going to get them. Very clever, that virus, but essential workers, children, were allowed at school. The rest of us had to put up with the noise. And then, in a situation where you're with your wife and you're not normally trapped in a house with your wife 23 hours a day and get on with each other, begin to get a bit irritable because, the food probably wasn't as great as it was, because after all, you could only go to a supermarket for a very short duration. And I believe it was only once a day. And they put up all that plastic to make it look like you were coming through some sort of like cold-it situation. And you couldn't talk to people and anybody if you didn't wear your mask. Do you remember those lovely days when if you didn't wear the mask, someone would accost you across the street? They were marvellous times, weren't they? Oh, how we enjoyed it. Those poor people who got a piece of rope and turned a little knot into a nice noose and then found themselves dangling from the ceiling or from off the door frame, something like that, because they couldn't cope with the depression and the sadness. And those people who were found in the bath having found a razor blade and wondered what you could do with it. Yes, those happy, lovely days in which people got thoroughly miserably depressed. But don't panic, because you could, of course, put on the mainstream media, which was ever so kind and kept our spirits up. Don't you remember how they kept our spirits up, reading out the death notices, telling us how many people had died, or how many cases. It was all about cases. I wondered what cases kept doing. I mean, I made sure all my suitcases never left the premises. They weren't going into hospital because it seemed to me they never told you how many people ever came out. It seemed strange. I always thought it was a very strange period in which we were sort of encouraged to stay indoors and eat highly processed food instead of being told to go out into the countryside and in that lovely bright vitamin D sunshine, which was healthy, to breathe fresh air. We weren't really encouraged to grow our own vegetables. I thought that the kind, benevolent government may have decided, you know, actually all that fast food, all that fatty food, that trans fats, all that nasty stuff, that highly processed crap, that might be a chance for them to say, do you know, this is an opportunity to get everybody healthy. We'll make sure you've got veg boxes. Everybody would get a veg box, and we'll give you recipes, and we'll have programs on how to train you to cook again, so that people could sit around the family table and actually enjoy a healthy mood. I thought that might happen, but no, actually we were encouraged to eat crap food, put on extra weight, stay inside, be anemic, and it didn't seem that anybody was pumping out good positive messages. It just seemed fear all the time from a kind and benevolent government which started to show its face. I think the mask actually slipped, particularly as we saw how they were so insistent that we used these tracking and trace technologies. And then, of course, they implemented the medical implementation, you know, that sort of procedure that we were all more than encouraged to do. I mean, you were told you were a complete idiot if you didn't have it. Do you remember those wonderful heady days of lockdown? Those heady, lovely days of lockdown. La da 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 da. I mean, when you think back to those heady days of lockdown, and then that medical procedure that was pretty much mandated, and the passports that you were supposed to carry to go to certain events, it did seem, I don't know, somewhat nasty, really. I didn't feel that the government did it quite right. But it's encouraging that the mainstream media, that called those people who used a little bit of critical thinking, that was encouraging their own natural immunity to fend off some supposed virus, that same mainstream media that was telling you how idiotic you were if you didn't take the medical intervention. It's interesting that they're up to their old tricks again, and they're sort of talking about some mutation that's coming again, and it's, you know, they're ramping up the story drip by drip, just like they did last time. I'd be interested to see when and if the kind, benevolent government, he says, with his eyes rolling up and down in these sockets, whether they would try and stand there. Can you imagine a Mr. Sunak this time standing behind the dispatch box, telling everybody, "Oh, I'm ever so sorry. Well, it looks like this is so horrific. It's going to be affecting the children. We can see that they're all dropping down like flies. Nothing to do with the medical aerosol that we've given them in the schools to protect themselves, safe and effective. We may have to ask people to stay back inside." I wonder if people would actually this time round sort of go, do you know what, we did that, and actually it seemed to be the worst possible thing that you could do, this concept of locking us down, and in the process putting up sort of these radiation towers that suddenly mysteriously went up, and more surveillance, and then later on getting in this framework of having 15-minute cities and digital IDs and things that no one's ever actually asked for from this kind and benevolent government that, oh, by the way, we're paying for, and in which you've turned into sort of tyrants, more a dictatorship than democracy. That in fact you seem to have forgotten, government, that you're our servants. We pay you to administer things. We don't pay you to dictate to us what to do. You've obviously forgotten that. And that's why I say possibly, if there was another of these things, well, more definitely, really, I just wouldn't bother to comply. I would be saying no. You had your experiment, it failed, it wasn't very good, loads of people died, people got depressed. Look at the waiting times at the NHS. All trust has gone from the doctors now. So many people were ferried off to nursing homes. We know that we couldn't visit our loved ones who were in the nursing homes without peering through the glass. We were told that we couldn't hug people. We had Christmas cancelled. People couldn't get wedded. You couldn't say goodbye to loved ones that had died. Yeah, you had your experiment, and to be honest with you, it wasn't as a pleasant experience, and you cocked it up no end. And in fact, 1% of the population seems to have made a massive amount of money out of it, and a lot of them seem to work for the government. So if you think that we're going to just acquiesce and do it again, I think you've got another think coming. And not only that, I actually think that this sort of government that we have, in which you have MPs that you write to, as many of my viewers have, and said, do you know what, we've noticed that a number of people got ill as a result of having a certain medical intervention, and all the MPs, bar perhaps a couple, have basically said, no, we believe in that medical intervention and it's safe and effective, when clearly, blatantly, obviously it isn't. And people have been snuffing it left, right and centre, and yet the mainstream media won't address it and the government won't address it, which is why I kind of say to hell with this system of government. It's over. You've had your day. You're redundant. You're of no use to us. I don't want to vote in any party. In fact, I'm done with voting whatsoever. You proved that you're inept, incompetent and unable to do anything. Your governance is a complete waste of time. That whole system, the Houses of Parliament, the Houses of Commons, the office of the Prime Minister, which of course, as you know, is a corporation, a for-profit corporation in business to extract as much money out of you as is possible. And having heard how it works for self-rule, people going about actually doing things for themselves and not having to pay all these taxes left, right and centre, I'm much more inclined to say goodbye, government. Thank you for your experimental stuff. It's been a failure. It's been very nice knowing you. Goodbye. But we're going to govern ourselves in a completely different way. We, the people, the sovereign people of this land, we can do it, you know. We can do it because, let's face it, you can't. You've cocked it up. You're forcing all these dictatorial things on us, these draconian measures no one's ever asked for. Actually, do you know what? More people have woken up to the nonsense, and they're now beginning to realise that to be governed in this very narrow way that you do is actually not for us. We want freedom and sovereignty. We want to let our children run around. We don't want to be told that our kids are sexualised or any of that. We want to be free and be sovereign people. And do you know what? I think most of us now are waking up to the fact that that's what we're going to do. That you've had your day, government. You've cocked it up. Mainstream media the same. You keep telling us these lies and we've seen through them, and we no longer want them. So thank you very much. It's been lovely doing and being part of your experiment, but those days are over. The great unwashed have decided we don't need you elites, you in your smarmy suits, you career politicians who really only think about yourselves. We don't need you. We don't want you. We, the collective people who are of humanity, we're going to look after ourselves, thanks very much. So bye-bye, clear off, shut your premises down, get rid of the Houses of Parliament, because we're setting up another system, and that's how it's going to be. So we've told you now. Thank you.